Part 1, The Funeral, expanded 1,000 words. David stood on the alien world surrounded by tall glowing trees that reached into a pale, lavender sky. The world of Vera was silent today, almost as if the planet itself was mourning. The soft wind carried a strange sound, a faint hum that came from the crystalline leaves brushing against one another. It was beautiful, but it felt unbearably sad. Cale was gone. David's chest felt heavy as he stared at the crystal coffin. Inside lay the first true friend he had ever made outside of Earth, the one alien who had stood by him when everyone else doubted humanity. Cale had been a warrior, a leader, a brother, and now his body rested perfectly still, bathed in silver light. David remembered the first time he met him. The war had been brutal then. David had been a lone survivor, stranded, bleeding, ready to give up. But Cale had found him, treated his wounds with strange glowing medicine, and told him in his deep, calm voice, "You will not die today, human. You still have something to do." That had been the beginning. Since then, they had fought side by side, saved each other more times than either could count. Cale had once said that David was more brother to him than anyone of his own blood. And now, as David stood here, that memory cut like a knife. The crowd of mourners was quiet. Veran funerals were not loud, not full of wailing like human ones. They were still. They let silence speak for grief. The coffin was lowered into a bed of living crystal that slowly closed over it, becoming one with the earth. It glowed softly, a mark of his life and deeds. Cale was gone, but a part of him would stay here forever. When the ceremony ended, people began to leave in small groups. David stayed where he was, unable to move. He felt like if he walked away, Cale would truly be gone. That was when he saw her, Alice. She moved through the fading crowd with the grace of someone who carried the weight of the sky on her shoulders. Her tall, slender frame was wrapped in a white mourning cloak. Her silver hair caught the last rays of light, shining faintly like starlight. Her eyes, those impossible silver eyes, found David's, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, in a voice that was soft but steady, she said, "He left you everything." David blinked. "Everything?" Alice nodded. "His wealth, his home, his name if you wish to claim it." Her words paused, heavy. "And me," David's breath caught. "You?" Her face did not change. His will was clear. "If I choose, I may stand beside you now." His wish was that I not be left alone. David felt the ground shift beneath him. This was not what he expected. He had thought he would attend a funeral, say goodbye, and leave. But this was a life-changing weight placed on his shoulders. He began, but the words died in his throat. "You do not have to decide now," Alice said quietly. "But understand this, human. He trusted you more than anyone. Do not dishonor that trust." She turned and walked away, leaving him standing there under the glowing trees with his heart pounding. He felt like he was standing on the edge of something vast and unknown. That night, David stayed in Kyle's home. No, his home now, for the first time. It was a house of crystalline light with walls that shimmered faintly as if alive. Everything about it felt wrong, like it was not meant for him. He walked through the halls and saw Cale's weapons on the walls, his medals, his books written in Veran script. It felt like Cale was still here watching. David sat down and buried his face in his hands. He had faced battles, wounds, death. But this was harder. This was a different kind of war, one inside his heart. When he finally lifted his head, he saw Alice standing in the doorway. She was silent for a moment before she said, "You look like him when you sit like that." David's throat tightened. "I'm not him." "No," she said softly. "But you were the only one he trusted to take his place." She stepped closer, her eyes shimmering with something between sadness and challenge. "Will you run, human? Or will you stay?" David met her gaze. He didn't know the answer yet. But deep down, he felt that this was the last promise Cale had left him, to guard what Cale loved most. And David had never broken a promise to his brother. He nodded slowly. "I'll stay." Alice turned and walked away again, leaving David alone with the weight of what he had just said. He did not know what the future held, but he knew this. His life had just changed forever. Part 3, The Silence, expanded, 5,000 words. The days that followed were quiet, almost too quiet. David had been in battles where the silence after gunfire felt deafening, but this was different. This silence felt alive, like it was pressing on him from all sides. He spent his mornings walking through Kale's gardens. They were unlike anything on Earth, full of glowing flowers that opened only at night and pools of water that reflected the sky like liquid glass. Everywhere he went, he saw pieces of Kale's life. The tree he had planted when he first became a warrior, the bench where David and Kale had shared their first drink together after the war ended. Each memory cut deep. Sometimes he would stop and just stand there, staring at nothing, feeling the weight of everything Kale had left him. He had been given so much, but it felt like a mountain he didn't know how to climb. Alice was always near, but she spoke little. She moved through the house like a ghost, graceful and silent. At night, David sometimes heard her crying softly in another room. He wanted to go to her to tell her that she wasn't alone. But every time he stood outside her door, he couldn't bring himself to knock. One evening, as the twin moons of Vera rose over the horizon, David found her sitting by the pond. She was staring into the water, her reflection rippling with every breath she took. He hesitated before stepping closer. "You loved him deeply," he said quietly. Alice did not look at him. "He was my heart," she whispered. David lowered himself to sit beside her. The grass was cool beneath him. "I don't want to take his place," he said after a long pause. At that, Alice turned to look at him. Her silver eyes were bright in the moonlight. "Then don't," she said simply. "But do not leave me alone in the dark." Those words struck something deep inside David. She was not asking him to replace Kale. She was asking him to stay, to be a presence, to keep her from being swallowed by her grief. "I can do that," David said. His voice was quiet, but it was steady. After that night, something shifted between them. They did not suddenly become close, but there was less distance in the way they moved around each other. Alice began to speak more, asking him questions about Earth, about what humans ate, what they celebrated, how they loved. David found himself answering, sometimes smiling as he remembered home. One afternoon, Alice showed him a room he had never seen before. It was filled with Kale's memories, his journals, his armor, his old weapons. "This is where he planned his battles," she said. "He kept every map, every order, every note. He said one day he would teach you our ways." David touched one of the maps, tracing the lines of a campaign they had fought together. He remembered Kale's laughter when they had survived that day. He remembered how proud Kale had been of his human friend. "I wish he was here," David said quietly. Alice nodded. "So do I." There was no anger in her voice now, no sharp edge. Just sadness and something else. Maybe trust. As the days passed, they began to share meals. At first, they ate in silence, but slowly they began to talk. About little things, about the house, the garden, the stars. David found that Alice had a quiet humor. Once, when he struggled with the strange Varan cutlery, she laughed softly and the sound surprised him. It was the first time he had heard her laugh since Kale's death. At night, David would sometimes sit outside, staring at the sky. He thought about leaving sometimes, about going back to Earth. But every time he imagined walking away, he saw Alice sitting alone in this house, and something inside him refused to let that happen. One night, as he sat there, Alice joined him. She sat down silently, wrapping her cloak around her shoulders. For a while, they just watched the stars. Then Alice spoke. "When Kale brought you here, I thought you were reckless," she said. "Humans fight too quickly. But he saw something in you. I think I see it now too." David glanced at her. "And what's that?" "Someone who does not break," she said. David didn't know what to say to that. So he said nothing, and they sat together until the stars faded and the first light of dawn touched the sky. For the first time since Kale's death, David felt like maybe, just maybe, he was where he was meant to be. Part 4. The Conflict. Expanded. 4,000 words. Life slowly began to feel less heavy for David, but peace did not last for long. The whispers started first, soft, almost polite. Wherever David went in the city, he felt the eyes on him. Varan spoke quietly when he passed, their silver eyes following him with suspicion. He could feel their questions, their judgment. One morning, as he walked through the market to buy fruit for the house, he overheard two voices nearby. "She still stays with him?" one of them said. "Yes," the other replied. "It is strange. She should have chosen one of us by now." David kept walking, pretending he hadn't heard, but his chest felt tight. It wasn't just idle gossip. It was disapproval. When he returned home, Alice was waiting for him. She stood in the doorway, her face calm, but her hands were clasped together. "They are talking," she said softly. "I know," David admitted. "They think you do not belong here." Her voice was quiet, but there was something hard in her tone. "Some say you should leave." David felt anger flare in his chest. "Cale trusted me. This was his home, and he gave it to me. I won't just walk away." "That is what I told them," Alice said. "But the council is restless. They fear you cannot protect what is yours. They may call for you to prove yourself." David frowned. "Prove myself? How?" "They will decide," Alice said. "It may not be a fight, but it will be a test. They will want to see if Cale's trust was well placed." That evening, a messenger from the council arrived. The summons was simple. David was to appear before the elders at first light. David didn't sleep much that night. He sat in Cale's study, staring at the walls, thinking about what was coming. He had faced soldiers, monsters, death itself, but this was different. This was not about survival. This was about proving that he deserved to stay. When morning came, he walked to the council hall with Alice at his side. The hall was full, not just elders, but many from the community. He could feel the weight of their stares. One of the elders rose. He was tall and severe, his silver robes flowing around him. "David of Earth," he said, "you have been given a great honor. Cale named you his brother. He left you his home, his wealth, and his wife's protection. But honor is not simply given. It must be earned." David stood tall. "I never asked for this," he said, his voice firm. "But I accepted it because Cale trusted me. I won't let him down." The elder's eyes narrowed. "Then you must prove it. You will face the trial of memory. If you endure it, you may stay. If you fail, you must leave this world and never return." A low murmur ran through the hall. David's stomach twisted. He didn't know what the trial of memory was, but from the way everyone reacted, he could guess it was not easy. "You will enter the memory hall at moonrise," the elder said. "No weapon, no companion. You will face what lives within you, and if you come out whole, you will be one of us." After the assembly was dismissed, David walked out with Alice. His hands were shaking, but his jaw was set. "You do not have to do this," Alice said quietly as they walked. "Yes, I do," David said. "If I leave, Cale's house will fall into other hands. And you?" He stopped, unable to finish the thought. "And I will be given to someone else," Alice said calmly, though her voice was tight. David clenched his fists. "Then I won't leave." That night, as the moons rose, David stood before the entrance of the memory hall. The door was a single slab of crystal, glowing faintly. The elder stood nearby and said, "You will see truth inside. Truth of yourself, truth of what you fear most. Few emerge unchanged." David took a deep breath. He thought of Cale, of the day they met, of the moment Cale died to save him. He thought of Alice sitting by the pond, her voice quiet but steady when she asked him not to leave her alone. "I'm ready," he said. The crystal door opened silently, and David stepped inside. The light swallowed him whole, and then the door closed behind him with a sound like a distant heartbeat. Outside, Alice stood waiting, staring at the sealed door. She clasped her hands and whispered, "Come back to me, human." Inside the hall, David felt the air grow cold. The walls around him shimmered, and then he was no longer in the hall. He was back in the war, standing on a battlefield surrounded by smoke and fire. And before him, Cale stood, alive, looking at him with those steady silver eyes. "Brother," Cale said, his voice echoing through the strange space, "will you carry my burden? Even if it breaks you?" David's throat tightened. "Yes," he said, "I will." The memory world began to shift, dragging him through every battle, every wound, every moment of fear he had ever known. And at the end, he stood once more at Cale's side, watching him fall. This time, David did not look away. He reached out his hand toward the vision and said, "I won't waste what you gave me. I won't let you down." The memory dissolved into light, and David felt himself pulled back toward the door. When he stepped out into the night, the crowd gasped. His face was pale. His clothes were damp with sweat, but his eyes were steady. "I am staying," he said, his voice strong. The elder nodded once. "Then you are one of us now." And for the first time, David felt that the house, the land, even this world might one day truly be his home. Part 5. The Trial. Expanded. 8,000 words. The moment the crystal door closed behind him, David felt the world vanish. The memory hall was silent, but it was not empty. The air itself seemed alive, humming softly like a distant storm. Then, without warning, light burst around him, and he was no longer standing on smooth crystal. He was back on the battlefield. Smoke stung his nose. The ground was muddy under his boots. He could hear the distant roar of enemy cannons. His pulse quickened. He knew this place. It was the night Cale had died. David's chest ached as he watched the memory unfold. He saw himself, younger, exhausted, dragging himself through the dirt. He saw Cale standing above him, his crystal blade glowing in the darkness. "Get up, human!" Cale's voice boomed, echoing unnaturally in the hall. "The fight isn't over." David felt the old pain, the broken ribs, the terror. "I can't," he whispered, just like he had that night. Cale's memory turned toward him, silver eyes piercing. "You said that once before, and I saved you. But who will save you now?" The world shifted again, faster this time. David was pulled through memory after memory. The first battle he survived, the friends he lost, the day he returned to Earth and found no one waiting for him. He saw all his failures, all the moments he wished he could change. Each memory was a wound, and each cut him open again. "Why do you stay here?" a voice asked. It was Cale's voice, but it came from everywhere at once. "You could return to your world. Leave this grief behind." David sank to his knees. His hands were shaking. "Because I promised you," he said hoarsely. "Because you saved me, and I can't throw that away. I won't." The battlefield faded, replaced by Cale's home. No, his home now. He saw Alice standing there, cloaked in white, staring at him. Her face was unreadable. "Do you protect me because you must?" she asked, though her voice echoed like the hall itself was speaking. David swallowed hard. "I protect you because Cale asked me to, but also because I want to. I don't want you to face this world alone." The image of Alice stepped closer, her silver eyes glowing. "And if my heart chooses you, will you run from me, human?" David felt his heart hammer in his chest. He thought of all the nights he had sat by her door, wanting to say something but staying silent. He thought of the way she laughed softly when he fumbled with Veyron spoons. He thought of how lonely she had looked by the pond that night. "No," he said at last, his voice firm. "I won't run." The world around him shattered like glass, and suddenly he was standing face to face with Cale. Not a memory, not a vision, Cale himself or something that felt like him. "Then stand." "Brother," Cale said, his voice softer now. "You carry my name. You carry my love for her. You carry the future I could not have. Will you bear it all even when it breaks you?" David straightened. He felt the weight of everything Cale had left him pressing on his shoulders, but he did not bow under it. "Yes," he said simply. Cale smiled. It was the same smile he had worn that night before he died. "Then you are ready?" Light filled the hall, so bright David had to close his eyes. When he opened them again, he was back at the entrance. The crystal door slid open and cool night air rushed over him. He stepped out into the moonlight. A crowd had gathered, elders, citizens, warriors. Their eyes were fixed on him. His clothes were damp with sweat, his face pale, but his gaze was steady. Alice was there, standing a few steps away. She did not move until he reached her. Then she stepped forward and touched his arm. "You came back," she said softly. David managed a small, tired smile. "I said I would." The elder who had sent him inside nodded gravely. "You have faced yourself and endured. You are worthy to stay." There was a murmur of approval from the crowd. Some bowed their heads in respect. For the first time, David felt the weight on his chest ease. He had faced his past and chosen his future. And for the first time, he believed it. He belonged here. That night, back in the crystal house, David sat with Alice by the glowing pond. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The night was peaceful, the stars reflecting in the water. At last, Alice said, "Cale would be proud." David's throat tightened, but he nodded. "I hope so. I think he would want us to keep going. Together." Alice turned to him, and for the first time she truly smiled. "Then we will." Part 6. The Choice. Expanded, more 1,000 words. In the days after the trial, the house no longer felt so heavy. The walls of crystal seemed brighter, warmer. The servants greeted David with quiet respect now, and when he walked through the city, the whispers had changed. People nodded at him, some even smiled. He had been tested and he had endured, but it was Alice who had changed the most. She no longer moved through the house like a shadow. She walked with purpose, and though her mourning cloak still hung in the hall, she no longer wore it every day. David noticed she had begun to wear colors again, soft blues and silvers that caught the light when she walked. One evening, as they sat together at the table, Alice looked at him thoughtfully. "You faced the hall," she said. "You faced everything that lived inside you." David nodded. "It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it made me see who I really am." Alice tilted her head slightly, her silver eyes searching his. "And who are you now, David of Earth?" He thought about that for a moment. "Someone who won't run. Not from this house. Not from what Cale asked me to do. Not from you." Her gaze softened. "Good," she said quietly. "Because I am tired of being alone." That night, Alice asked him to walk with her through the gardens. The air was cool, and the glowing flowers lit the path like lanterns. They stopped by the pond where they had spoken weeks ago. The water was still, reflecting the twin moons. Alice turned to him. "Cale loved you like a brother," she said. "And he loved me. I think he would not want us to live in sadness forever." David felt his throat tighten. "I've been afraid," he admitted. "Afraid that if I let myself care for you, it would feel like I was taking something that wasn't mine." Alice stepped closer. "I am not a thing to be taken. I am a person who chooses." Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. "And I choose not to grieve forever. I choose to live. But I cannot do it alone." David swallowed hard. "Then let me stay. Not just as Cale's friend. Not just as the man who protects this house. Let me stay as myself." Alice's silver eyes shone in the moonlight. Slowly, she reached out and took his hand. It was the first time she had ever touched him willingly. Her fingers were cool but strong. "Then stay," she whispered. David felt something inside him loosen, something that had been wound tight since the war. For the first time since Cale's death, he felt peace. After that night, things changed between them. They began to spend more time together, not out of duty, but out of choice. They walked the gardens every evening. They shared stories, laughed more often. David taught Alice some words of English, and she teased him gently when his Veyran pronunciation was still clumsy. One rainy afternoon, they sat together in Cale's study, reading his journals. Alice showed David a page where Cale had written about him. "David fights like fire," the entry read, "but he carries more guilt than he should. I think one day he will forgive himself, and when he does, he will become someone great." David's eyes stung as he read the words. Alice touched his shoulder. "He believed in you," she said softly. "And so do I." Slowly, David began to make the house his own. He kept Cale's medals and weapons on the walls, but he added things from Earth. A carved wooden figure his grandfather had made, a small Earth flag, a picture of the friends he had lost. It became a place where both worlds lived together. One night, as the first stars appeared, Alice joined him on the balcony. She wore a soft silver dress, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked less like a grieving widow and more like someone stepping into a new life. "Do you regret staying?" she asked him. David looked at her for a long moment, then shook his head. "No, I think I was meant to be here," Alice smiled gently. "Then perhaps I was meant to choose you." David's heart beat faster at her words, but he did not look away. Instead, he reached out and took her hand again. This time she did not tremble. They stood together under the stars, their hands clasped, the world quiet around them. It was not a declaration of love, not yet, but it was a promise that they would face whatever came next, together. Here, Part 7, The Future, expanded. 1,000 words. The peace did not last long. A month after David's trial, a message came from the outer clans. They questioned the right of a human to inherit Kyle's estate, to guard his widow and to hold his wealth. Some even claimed David had bewitched Alice. The council called for a final hearing, one that would decide whether David would remain on Vera or be exiled. When Alice told David, he only nodded. "Then we go," he said simply. The council hall was vast, made of living crystal that caught and amplified every sound. The elders sat in a half circle, their robes glowing faintly with status markings. The room was full. Citizens, warriors, even children had come to watch. The air felt heavy with judgment. David stood tall, dressed in the formal robes Alice had given him. They felt strange on his shoulders, but he wore them anyway. At his side, Alice stood straight and calm, her presence a quiet anchor. One of the elders rose. "David of Earth," he said, his voice echoing, "you have passed the trial of memory. But there are those who still doubt you. They say you stay here for wealth, for power, perhaps even for the widow herself. What do you say to these accusations?" David took a breath. Every eye was on him. He thought of Cale, of that battlefield night, of the promise he had made. He thought of Alice standing beside him now. "I did not ask for this," David said, his voice steady but strong. "I did not come to take Cale's place. I came because he was my brother in everything but blood. When he died, he left me his home, his people, his wife. He trusted me with them. I will not break that trust. Not for your wealth, not for your approval, not for anything." There was a murmur through the crowd, but David wasn't finished. He turned slightly, looking at Alice. "I stay because I choose to stay. I stay because I care for her. Not as Cale's widow, not as someone I must protect, but as herself." Alice's eyes softened and she stepped forward. For the first time since the funeral, she spoke not as Cale's widow but as her own voice. "I choose him," she said clearly. "Cale trusted him and I trust him. That is enough for me. Let it be enough for you." The hall went quiet. The elders exchanged glances. Then the eldest among them rose, leaning on his staff. "Then so be it," he said at last. "David of Earth, you are no longer guest nor guardian. By this council's word, you are recognized as Cale's true heir. This house, this land, and this bond are yours." The crowd erupted, some with cheers, some with quiet nods, some with grumbles of discontent. But the decision was made. When they left the hall, Alice walked beside him in silence until they reached the courtyard. Then she stopped and turned to him. "You spoke from your heart," she said softly. David let out a slow breath. "I meant every word." She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the faint silver pattern in her irises. "Then let us not live as shadows anymore." David hesitated for just a moment, then he reached for her hand. She let him take it. They stood there for a long time, the glow of the city around them, the air cool and quiet. From that day forward, they were no longer bound by grief, but by choice. David took Cale's place not as a ghost of the man he had been, but as himself. Together, he and Alice rebuilt the house into a home full of life and laughter again. Years later, when travelers came to Vera, they spoke of the human who had stood before the council and won not by strength of arms but by strength of heart. They spoke of the widow who chose not to fade, but to live again. And under the crystal trees glowing softly under the lavender sky, David often thought of Cale and whispered to the wind, "I kept my promise, brother." And he knew deep down that somewhere Cale was smiling. Part 2, The Gift, expanded. 1,000 words. The next morning, David woke up to soft light filling the crystal house. The walls seemed to glow faintly with the sunrise, casting silver-blue shadows across the floor. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then the memories came rushing back. The funeral, Alice's words, and the promise he made. He felt a heavy knot in his stomach. Staying was one thing, but what did it actually mean? What was he supposed to do now? Before he could think too long, a Veran attendant arrived, carrying a glowing scroll. "The council has sent for you," the attendant said in a quiet, formal tone. "They will read Cale's will in your presence." David nodded silently. His heart beat faster. He was about to find out exactly what Cale had left him. The council chamber was made of crystal just like everything else on this world. But it felt heavier, colder. Elders sat in a half circle, their silver eyes fixed on David as he entered. At the center of the room stood Alice. She was calm, but her hands were clasped tightly together. One of the elders rose and began to read Kyle's final message. His voice was deep and clear. "To my human brother, David, you came to us a stranger and left as my kin. I owe you my life, and I know you would say the same of me. My people will remember me as a warrior, but I want them to remember you as well. As the human who stood by my side when no one else would, I leave to you my fortune, my lands, my house. But most of all, I leave you Alice. Protect her, guide her, and if her heart chooses you, do not turn away. This is my last command, my last gift." The words echoed in David's ears. He stood frozen. The wealth, the house, even those felt too big for him. But Alice, how could Cale ask this of him? When the reading was done, the council turned their eyes on David. "Do you accept this inheritance?" One of them asked. David hesitated. His hands felt clammy.